See you again for day 2 of the DisSPA conference. For those of you who were here yesterday, I think we agree that it was a really insightful set of presentations and conversations around how do we connect with each other, how do we collaborate with each other, and how hopefully we can advocate for the disabled community to be fully included within sport and physical activity. Yesterday the focus was around high performance and community, and today we want to join the pathway up by exploring research around from physical activity. We're going to look at some stuff in terms of schools, higher education. We've got the incredible Maria Lyle and Maria's coaching corner. So we'll have releasing the voice of the athletes later on today, because we believe that they're fundamental in understanding their experiences and how they guide what we are hoping to achieve. And then at the end of the day, you have the pleasure of me finishing off with a keynote with Esther who's at UK coaching but has now been seconded over to Sport England. So we have a real, like I said, we were trying to join up the pathway, and that's often fragmented. In terms of today, what I wanted to do is introduce Dr. Ladislav Petrovic from the ICC, who's also based in Hungary. The ICC has been one of our partners since 2017, when we ran their Global Coach Conference in the Echo Arena, and since then we've been building that relationship through Paracoach as a key partner. And the ICCE, International Council for Coaching Excellence, was kind of the brainchild of the late Professor Pat Duffy, who was a key strategist in terms of where coaching is based globally, alongside many others like Professor John Lyle, were really instrumental in putting coaching on the map. And Pat Duffy was my first director of studies, and again he passed away after a year back in 2014. But what Pat was always, his mantra was, knowledge is fallible. In other words, what we know now will probably change as we collaborate together, negotiate with each other, challenge each other, and come into some form of agreement. So although he was a systems person and he did a lot for coaching, he was always challenging myself and Haley. Haley was still is was my supervisor, now that I've got a PhD. They both challenged me in terms of how do we create new knowledge and how do we impact policy. So we've now developed the Paracoach Working Group, which is part of the ICCE. So they've really taken on board the work that we've been doing and helping us to shape kind of a global perspective around coaching in parasport or disability sport. So without further ado, just introduce Ladislav from the ICC.
Thank you, Tabo. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the International Council for Coaching Excellence. First of all, I would like to say thank you to our host, Liverpool John Moores University. As Tabo said, we had an excellent Global Coach Conference here back in 2017. So the first kind of co-creation started in 2015 when they won the bid for this conference. Over 400 people from around the world were here, and we had an excellent event. At that time, we had most of our organizing committee meetings in Redmonds, which is just a few blocks away from here. And then Tabo told me that you see that lot that belongs to our university. And there will be a huge sport complex there and everything else. And I was like, oh yeah, there are some plans all the time, everywhere. But now we are here in 2021, and the beautiful buildings are here, and it's a great for such event. Once again, thank you very much for the organization of this event. It's really great conference. I really enjoyed yesterday, and I hope that today will be as good as it was yesterday. Special thanks goes to our international guests, the group from Poland, Hungary, Netherlands, and our special guest from the European Olympic Committee. If you've been traveling these days, you might know that it's not easy to travel, and it's not easy to fill in the forms of the UK government to enter the UK, especially for non-English speakers. Try it once, it's not easy. But we are all here, and we enjoy our time. So I would like to wish you a very successful second day of the conference, and back to you, Tabo.
I'm just going to hand over to Zoe, who will host the session. Professor Zoe Knowles, and she's another incredible leader within the school, a forerunner in terms of how we interact and network with our different communities. So over to you, Zoe.
Thanks, Tabo. Morning, everyone. As Tabo says, I'm part of the senior management team within the School of Sport and Exercise, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with the Paracoach project. I'm putting on an event today, and obviously you'll have seen from the DisSPA pledge last night that we very much feel inspired to carry on the legacy of Paracoach forwards, and we hope people in the room will be part of that journey, and we hope we can connect with you after the project itself is finished, and continue the fantastic momentum that's been happening over the last couple of days on the project overall. So hopefully we can meet back in Liverpool at sometime in the future. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Brett Smith, who I've known for a long time, and worked on various projects. We share common interests across qualitative research, and have had many debates over pushing that field forwards and advancing that field. So Professor Brett Smith is the Director of Research and Professor of Disability and Physical Activity in the Department of Sport and Exercise Science at Durham University. So Brett focuses on disability, physical activity, sport and health. He's the chair of the Disability and Physical Activity Expert Working Group for the Chief Medical Officer's Physical Activity Guidelines for disabled people here in the UK. I look forward to hearing about that role, what's emerging from that role, and how it might inspire our practice here in the UK, and obviously for colleagues from other nations to take some of that inspiration back with them. So over to you, Brett.
Thank you, Zoe. First, thank you for the kind invite, particularly Tabo, but more importantly than Tabo, thank you to the organising committee for those people working behind the scenes, people like Amy, who are not often given a great deal of credit, so thank you, Amy, to the rest of the people who are not standing at the front like Tabo, and those people deserve great credit, so thank you, everybody. What I'd like to do today is unpack some complexities around co-production, why it's important, the different types, provide some examples of co-production in action, highlight some challenges of it, and a modest request to use your narrative imagination regarding how we might utilise co-production in the different domains and spaces that you operate. I think it's pertinent to begin with when I start. I come from, in this talk, from different perspectives regarding co-production. Whilst I'm an academic and a professor of disability, I've also been a mental health service user for many years as well. So I've been on the other side of co-production, being a participant of co-production, as well as doing co-production with disabled people for many years. So let me start addressing the first question, so to speak. What is co-production? I address that question for many different reasons, primarily because it's become a buzzword in academia. It's become a buzzword, sadly, in academia for many different reasons, some positive reasons, but sadly some negative reasons. And one of those negative reasons, it's an opportunity to generate grants. It's a buzzword that we can put on our grant applications, and it's a route into that. And as a result, there's a lot of tokenism going on in the field, sadly. And I think as well as a lot of tokenism, there's a lot of conflation and misunderstandings about what is co-production. And when we look at the academic literature, and equally important, look at the literature, for example, like the different co-production groups operating around the UK by user-led organisations, for example, we also find different ideas about what counts as co-production. But it's important to have an understanding of what co-production can be and might be. Why? Many different reasons, but one is if we don't understand what is co-production, how are we going to do it well? It drives us forward, it's a guide. But equally, for the people I'm working with, how could I be held accountable for what type of co-production I'm going to do? So it's really important that we have a general understanding of what it is. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been working with academics and our co-production group made up of people with lived experience of disability, social work, and working in the physical activity sector, of trying to unpick what is co-production. And we've identified what we call a typology. At least 3 different types of co-production are dominant within the different spaces we operate. I don't want to go into the first one because that's not research orientated, but I just want to give you a flavour of the 2 types that have now been identified as co-production: integrated knowledge translation and what we've called equitable and experientially informed co-production. The integrated knowledge translation for the academic ignorance comes from the Canadian context, driven by grants, but essentially there are 2 key elements to this type of co-production. One, people work with knowledge users. That is a really key word because knowledge users are not usually defined. When we look at the literature, knowledge users are healthcare professionals, for example, and academics. What it doesn't do, it does not necessitate, that's the key word, it does not necessitate that people with lived experience, experiential knowledge, must be included. So, in other words, people with lived experience may join or may not join. It's not a necessity. And the second part is underpinned by a technocratic rationale. And what do we mean by a technocratic rationale? It's an end goal. In other words, if we can work with healthcare professionals, for example, or people in the physical activity sector, local communities, then we're more likely to, for example, improve physical activity participation. Or in academic terms, we're more likely to increase impact. So there's an outcome orientated. The other one is what we've termed equitable and experientially informed. And there are several key elements that guide this type of co-production. Number one, as it says here, people with lived experience must be included in the co-production. There must be priority setting from the very beginning, what's important to us, and they must be guiding and influencing the research as it progresses, doing the research with, alongside the academics as just one example. It also is about equitable relationships. Power relationships need to be as equitable as we can best be within these different contexts. None of those 2 aspects are embedded in integrated knowledge translation. So those are the 2 different types. And there's a third differentiation when we look at equitable, experientially informed. It's not only interested in impact or the technocratic rationale, but there's also a democratic underpinning to it, in that it's good in and of itself. If we can do this work together, then we're going to make a better society. Now, of course, with those lofty aims in mind, it's very easy to think, well, which one's the best? The question that I ask, which one is the gold standard? What we argue for in the paper, there is no gold standard. Different types of co-production are suitable for different types of work. I think that's our starting point. But the key point is to know what type of co-production we're doing at the very beginning, and if, like in one project, we are not, for example, minimising power, or we're not embedding people with lived experience at the very heart of the project, then we're failing. And quite rightly, we need to be told that, and quite rightly, we are doing it wrong. So we can be held accountable for these different types. And I've alluded to why co-production is considered important, but it's pertinent to note that there isn't actually a great deal of evidence to say why co-production is important. So I think that's a future-forming idea for us, that we've got to start collecting better evidence. As I've already alluded to, it makes society better, and I think for us in here, it makes research fit for purpose. It's usable, useful, and relevant. And that's particularly so when people with lived experience are themselves setting the priorities for what counts as research, rather than, for example, me, as an academic sitting in my ivory tower, thinking what I know is important for the research to be done now. And as I said, it's also about producing research that makes a difference. So we have these underpinning rationales for why we think co-production is important and should be used. And as I said, it's becoming a buzzword, but as I've already highlighted, we need to hold it to high and difficult standards if we believe these are some good reasons for doing co-production. And let me give you some examples of how the work we've been doing over the years has influenced and shaped the context that I've been very privileged to operate in. In 2017, we worked with Disability Rights UK to create the Chief Medical Officer's Guidelines for Disabled Adults. Very dull read, don't go there on that front, a lot of work on that. But what we also were asked to do was create an infographic that's used, for example, to teach all medical students who come to university in the Moving Healthcare Professionals programme. It's used by different sports organisations, etc. And when the Chief Medical Officers asked me to do this project, my demand was it needs to be driven by disabled people. They said, no, it's going to be subjective, it's going to be full of emotions, it's going to be political. And I said, of course. So we can't have any of that. I stepped away and thankfully they came back and said, we're actually quite interested in this idea, so let's go ahead with it. And I worked with over 350 disabled people in what we call knowledge cafes, something I'll come back to as we progress. But what they highlighted through this process was tremendously important. So, as just one brief example, and I'll provide another example in a moment, they highlighted the importance of pleasure and fun, and that physical activity makes you feel good. Now, everybody in this room will be thinking, yeah, that's really obvious, isn't it? Healthcare promotion does not put that at the forefront of the public agenda. It's all about you must do physical activity because it's good for your health. That doesn't work. You know, people are not cognitively driven like that. We're not. So it's been a really bad health promotion message. And this was the first time this message had been at the heart of a public health programme. This was not a message I designed. This was a message that disabled people had designed themselves and argued it should be at the forefront of this public health message. What they also argued when we talked about sedentary behaviour was how many public health messages around the world are ableist. And the classic example is sit less, stand more. I've highlighted I've taken my colleagues' names out of here, but many academics around the world are saying, you know, ditch the chair, you know, it's a killer. Well, I think we could question that terminology. And sitting down is bad for your health, stand up, etc. The American Heart Association just released their new guidelines for physical activity, and at the heart of it is sit less, stand more. These are ableist messages, And what the disabled community were telling me is we can't have this at the heart of our public health messages. And so we changed it. We went to government, they changed it, other governments have followed suit. Ireland have recently followed this. And this to me is a great example of disabled people influencing policy, of saying this is a message that is ableist, it's discriminatory. We don't want this anymore. And we're very privileged then, as a result, to work with not only different organisations who endorsed this as part of an academic publication, but we worked with Disability Rights UK so that we could disseminate this work, but also ask disabled people what type of messages do you want so that we can challenge the issue of sedentary behaviour, that it's not ableist and it's more inclusive language. And there are people on there, I also highlight this because as part of co-production, we often get rewards in terms of publishing our academic papers. That's our capital, but of course that should not be the case. So the people that we work with are also authors of this paper. So Cameron is the Chief Executive of Disability Rights UK on there, and Disability Rights UK is the author of the Chief Medical Officer's reports as well. As a result of that, many of the disabled adults kept asking me the question, well, what about children? Government says nothing about children. We've got guidelines for pregnancy, we've got guidelines for adults, we've got guidelines for children in general, but is there anything different in relation to disabled children? Chief Medical Officers thankfully listened. They offered us a small fund, and I'll come back to that, to design new guidelines for disabled children. I want to stress first and foremost that whilst Chief Medical Officers press the significance of guidelines, they actually do very little in terms of behaviour change. Very little. They're an important starting point. That's all. They're an important starting point. But with disabled children and young adults, for the last few months, I've been very privileged to work with them and to translate the results from the evidence base into this infographic, and we're moving as well. They want to transform it into animation and to other forms of communication so it appeals to them. I highlight this here, and I want to stress this is a draft because it is certainly going to change. I'm working with groups as we're progressing on this. But I highlight this again to highlight the importance and significance of co-production and how this is very different to all Chief Medical Officers' guidelines and infographics around the world which have not been co-produced. So if we look at the top on here, and for my eyesight pretty bad, it's, they're talking about equality and inclusivity. At the top we're going to have a banner about how to do physical activity and so on. But what's key there is many of the young children talked about, we can talk about the importance of physical activity for health reasons, but unless we start having more inclusivity and equality, there's a debate about equality and equity, but the kids settled on equality so far. We need that at the top. We need that top. We need some form of political statement, at least in their eyes. And what's nice as well, they highlight the importance of fun. No health messages around the UK have that. And said without that, we're not going to get anywhere. And they also talked about in the second section the different benefits and different disabled children. We worked with adults such as CP, autism, amputee, etc., a whole raft. And people said different things. So, for example, young children with CP, it's really good for strengthening my muscles, etc. Children with autism, I really like this one, it keeps me calm, stops me stressing. So these are the language that they were creating. Again, I did not create this, I was just a vehicle for them to create this. We had a co-production group that was led by some young disabled children. They went and spoke with other disabled children. We've also got different schools on board who are working with their pupils to redesign this and to make this better. And so I highlight one new colleague in this room because, of course, I want to celebrate Liverpool in this, and we also have a top world 10 teacher in the audience here. So I want to thank David, who will be taking this forward in relation to transforming it into Braille and working with some blind children to be able to communicate this better. And I also want to highlight the significance at the bottom here of various things, because I've got colleagues around the world that are literally generating millions of pounds in grant funding around the idea that we should talk about snacks, physical activity as snacks, snackivity. Big, lots of money going into this. They've not spoken to any kids. When I asked all the children, what works for you? They said bite size, bite size. And after about 6 sessions with all these kids, I said, why bite size? I don't get it. I don't get it. And they were leading it because they had the power. And I said, I just don't get this. And I often positioned myself in different ways. So they were the teacher or they were the coach. And I was this young athlete that wanted to learn more, or I was their pupil to try and minimise power relations, little tactics like that. And they said, it's BBC. BBC bite size, that's how we talk. It makes sense. Bite size chunks do lots of different chunks. So then I started to ask the idea, well, what do you think about this idea of snacking? To quote, it's cheesy, it's horrible, do not help design this. It doesn't work. Every kid, there was one child, which was interesting, said, I really like that. I said, why? I remember now, she said, it means I can eat ice cream and run at the same time. Okay. All the parents hated it because it's associated with snacking. That demonstrates not only the significance for me of co-production, but also how as academics, we can't sit in our ivory tower and think what we believe is significant and equally important, move our careers forward and generate massive amounts of money that do nothing. That needs to change. That really does need to change. So this infographic will be used in the Moving Healthcare Professionals programme. That programme teaches all medical students about the importance of physical activity. If anybody notices the 20-minute message, that is different to the World Health Organization's new current guidelines. Why is it different? I'm on a political tightrope here with World Health Organization I'm speaking with, but very simply, when we look at the evidence of the World Health Organization, they did not include any disabled research in there. So it was not based upon any research with disabled people or any evidence based on disabled people. It was a guess, in words, on that front. So we've got some political manoeuvrings going on there, but I'll leave that to the Chief Medical Officers. And the other example I want to give is a new programme that's called Moving Social Work in terms of co-production and the significance of this. This was a priority setting set through and by disabled adults. When I was doing these knowledge cafes with the community, I was asking, well, what next? I always ask the question, what next? What's important to you? And I said, well, we need to work better with different professionals to communicate physical activity, to support us, and so on. Me, I made the assumption it would be healthcare professionals, because that's what the literature tells us. Healthcare professionals are the key, GPs are a key messenger of physical activity on this. That was my assumption. Many disabled people said, there are another group. There are another group of people, and those are social workers. Not for everybody, not every disabled person is aligned with a social worker, etc. But we have in the UK what's called the Care Act. People can use their personal budgets to be physically active, to play sport, to go in dance routes, etc. So they can use the personal budgets as a means to play sport. There are problems with that, it's not perfect, it's something that we want to develop moving forward. But the long and short of it, they challenge the contemporary assumption that GPs are the sole and only arbiter of promoting physical activity, or physiotherapists is the second. It was social workers. So we went to Social Work England, Disability Rights UK and I, we said to Social Work England, what about your thoughts on this? Disabled people say you're a potentially really important workforce to promote physical activity. Their response was, we never thought of that. We don't have it in our curriculum. We actually don't know how to do this effectively. So how could we do this? I said, I'm not the person to ask that question. Let's go back to disabled people. Let's go back to social workers themselves who are working on the ground. Let's go back to social workers who are teaching social work. Let's go back to Social Work England. As a result of that, it took over a year, and that's the other issue of co-production. It's not quick. It doesn't fit in with too many academic timescales on this. We had a year about how we could design an appropriate project, just the design of it, and how we might get appropriate funding to fund this work. And what the co-production group, which is made up of multiple people with lived experience of social work, promoting physical activity in the community, such as active partnerships, and of course disabled people themselves at the heart of it, they said what we need to do is train the social workers of today, people working on the ground, so to speak, and train the social workers of tomorrow in universities. So we're working now to develop an appropriate curriculum, what the disabled people think is important to be put in the curriculum, what the social workers think should be important, should be put in the curriculum. We're testing it in 5 different universities in the northeast. Disabled people are doing the interviewing, disabled people are doing the analysis with us, disabled people are on the publications alongside us. They are financially supported along the way as well in this. So they're at that very heart of it. The challenges, the changing, what we're doing, we're held accountable continuously on this. They're on the publication, on different types of co-production as well. So for some of them that's important too, moving forward. So this is just beginning. We're hoping to roll it out next year. We've got some good results working with Social Work England and working with Disability Rights UK. Their Get Yourself Active programme. There's many different types of good organisations across the UK. I find Disability Rights UK particularly influential and important and a good group of people to work with. So we're designing this. We're going to test it in the curriculum, not unlike the Moving Healthcare Professionals programme, and to see how we might work that, see how we might use, for example, personal budgets more effectively, navigate the fortress terrain so that social workers can support disabled people to use the personal budgets to get more active, to stay more active, etc. Lots of different underpinning reasons for this, and as I said, disabled people now interviewing social workers about how we can do this better. But I don't want to hold social workers up as the utopian group of people. There are many other important people that we should be working alongside, and I highlight Sport for Confidence as an organisation of OTs because I think they're a particularly important, interesting and thought-provoking organisation that do amazing work. So I highlight this is because very too often we become fascinated and obsessed with one group of professionals. And I think what we now need much better is a broader appreciation of how different professionals could work better together as well. Because we're certainly siloed, we're not talking to each other and so on. So I highlight Sport for Confidence as an organisation that I think is an exemplar organisation that are working alongside with disabled people, doing co-production to enable people to be more active and to stay more active. Look at the website, a great organisation. But back to co-production and the work that we're doing. When we were designing the project, we had a co-production charter that we all signed, that we need to be held accountable. We also designed some principles. Now these are in academic language. We've designed them in other types of language in different, more accessible ways for different audiences as well. I say we, because disabled people, social workers and physical activity champions have been doing this with us on this. And there are various key principles that I want to highlight for good reason. The first is that co-production needs to be adequately resourced. I say that because it's not cheap. It's not cheap to do. So the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines, they offered us X amount of money to cost us 3 times more to deliver this, to do good co-production work. I highlight that because what we need is more lobbying for our funders to support good co-production and to support good co-production that pays the participants well for doing their work rather than this tokenistic effort of a 20 quid Amazon voucher, thank you. Most people don't even like Amazon and find it, so we need lots of different ways of even doing that. For us, we talked about how power could be shared through more equitable relationships, how we could work better together, and how those with relevant experiential knowledge are continuously at the heart of the process. So it's not just having meetings, it's regular forms of communication, and how those regular forms of communication are created and designed was not by me or my colleagues in the academic space, it was by the co-production group. This is how we want to communicate with you, this is how regularly we want to do it, this is how many meetings we want per week, etc., etc., etc. on this. And it's a test that we keep coming back to in our advisory board meetings, in our working group meetings. Are we still having equitable relationships? And if not, how could we get back on track on that? Of course, all these other principles like transparency, relational ethics are crucial. Different knowledge bases as well. I highlight different knowledge bases because sadly in academia we have a hierarchy of knowledge where randomised control trials and quantitative research at the top, then people's with lived experience, their experiential knowledge is at the bottom. The Chief Medical Officer's response to me when I asked disabled people to be at the heart of this testified to that. It was as though that knowledge is not worthy to be included in this. What we're arguing is that multiple different types of knowledge, including randomised control trials, including people's experiential knowledge, are valuable and equally valuable for this project, and we need to respect them, value them and blend them rather than having this tokenistic effort. But for me the biggest challenge has been this: diversity is important, so it's not just disabled people but or social workers, it's all about race, class, etc. embedded in that. It's different diversity, it is. But what has been crucial about how we manage this, because in a lot of co-production there's an attempt to form consensus. Do we all agree? Yes. One dissenting voice, doesn't matter, we've reached 90% consensus. That's kind of like how this goes. We talked about this at the beginning, how are we going to deal with this? And we agreed that conflict, being friendly enemies, was crucial. That if a person disagreed, their voice just wasn't pushed to the margins as the insignificant or unimportant. So we went back into the academic literature, and there was some philosophy from the early 1990s that had this phrase, agonistic pluralism, and that's about working in democratic ways so that conflict could be included in a positive manner, that we could become friendly enemies. And we've certainly got at least 3 people on the co-production group who really challenge us, and it's not an easy process, don't get me wrong, it's not easy. But for us to respect those challenges and how we can incorporate their different voices, their different experiences, and their great ideas that conflict with many others is not only challenged, but what we're also finding, it is actually improving the research itself. It is very significant. So I'm interested about how we can start developing this idea of agonistic pluralism. There's only one person that's talked about it in the co-production literature alongside ourselves. So I think it's a really important idea. It's not antagonism, it's agonism, which is something very different. How might we do it? Well, many people in co-production will be very familiar with the ladder. Of course, there's many problems with that in terms of it's hierarchical and so on. But for us, it's a useful starting point for having conversations about doing co-production, about what it might mean. It's a problematic visual image, don't get me wrong, but it's a useful heuristic to engage in conversations. But perhaps one of the biggest ways we've been doing co-production, and one of the most effective ways, and I think I would like that to be witnessed yesterday in one of the coaching sessions, with all due respect, is what's called the World Cafe, or as disability rights prefer, a knowledge cafe. And essentially that is mimicking a cafe environment, except if we used the example yesterday with the workshops, which were fantastic, rather than as being static, people would have moved around onto different tables. And why is that important? Because on a table, for example, one voice might dominate. Power differentials are then crushed in that space, or somebody might say, I'm an expert, and another person then may feel uncomfortable with speaking out because they have the perception in there. And when people move around these tables, they can challenge their past views, they can have different opinions, and the plurality of voices are brought to the table. In academic terms, it's the Bakhtinian approach about plurality. It's about the diversity of voices. It's about bringing diversity into the consciousness. And with that diversity, we're able to have better respect, we're able to privilege different knowledges, and we're able to have agonistic pluralism in terms of conflict. So we host these knowledge cafes. Thankfully, some of these are now in person. If anybody wants to be involved in them, feel free to email me. We're very inclusive in this. If anyone wants to take part in them or even do them, you're very welcome to join us. These are being conducted not only by academics, but by disabled people themselves. They are leading them. They've changed how we've done this as well. They've changed it quite radically. We set up a protocol for doing this, working alongside people. We shared it with our co-production group, said, we like this, we hate this, we hate this, we hate this, that needs to be changed. Okay, how can we make this better? And their experience, their voice, their knowledge has contributed to improving this. So we found this incredibly useful, and you might want to consider that in, for example, the types of sessions where we're moving forward as we progress. But with that, I'm speaking about physical activity, and I want to connect with different people in the audience, and I just want you to use your narrative imagination. Imagination is a crucial resource for any human being. Anybody that has children will recognise the significance of imagination. I just want to throw some different things out there. Over the years, my colleagues, notably led by my colleagues Damien and Alice there, we've been doing work with different Paralympians, asking about how does activism fit into your lives. All different types of results. Some Paralympians want to be different forms of activists. Some Paralympians don't want to be activists. Some people have a continuum of activism, etc., etc. But we found some problems as well in terms of some athletes have said, you know, I really want to be more vocal, but I'm scared. I'm scared what that organisation might say. These are perceptions I want to stress, but they're nonetheless significant perceptions. So some athletes have been scared about wanting to say, this is wrong. This is fundamentally wrong what it means to be a disabled adult or a disabled child, and this needs changing. They've been concerned and scared. Now, this research was done a few years ago. I suspect these are differences of happening with the Me Too movement and activism being more on our landscape. But as a strategic plan also highlights, we need to cultivate a generation where we can debate the issue of power. I was full in agreement of some voices last night who acted advocates for disability rights and use their voices to highlight everyday discrimination disabled people face. So that's embedded in the strategy. We spoke with lots of national governing bodies that say, yeah, we're fed into that, but we don't really care about it. We're just caring about performance. So how could we imagine this strategy to work if we believe it should be there? If we believe it should be there, that's not for me to say. How might we work with disabled people who are not athletes to enable this strategy? How might we work better with athletes to not only co-produce these strategies, but to enact them? To highlight the barriers to enacting them and highlight how we can solve these barriers and overcome them. We found many barriers for athletes wanting to be activists, many different barriers on this. We might also ask the question, what might it be like for coaches to co-produce their research, to co-produce not only their research, but their programs with disabled people at the heart of them, at the heart. How might we do that? How might we do a different type of co-production? I've got my sense of what the para-coach, what type of co-production that's currently being done, and I think it's important to reflect upon that, the type of co-production being done in that, and how that might drive it forward. Could another type of co-production have improved this type of work? Could it be developed further? How could this type of work reflect upon the co-production process to not only highlight what it does well, but to be critically reflexive about some of the dilemmas and challenges that have been part of this? How might we have the different people in this room and elsewhere that say, the Paralympics have left a great legacy? I was Parliament many years ago, everyone was saying, yay, it's a great legacy. Whereas other people say it's failed, and other people are on the, yeah, it has and it hasn't scenario. We have no evidence on this. That's the first. We have no good evidence to support that. But my question is how might we imagine, if we think legacy is important, how might we co-produce what a good legacy might mean for those people who are not involved in sport, for those people from the LGBT community who are disabled, from refugees who are disabled, a whole raft of diverse voices at the table to say, this is what we think the Paralympic could leave us in terms of legacy. How might we enact this? How might you be held accountable for this? Imagine what that might look like. I don't know. I don't even know if that's a good idea, but I'm just saying, imagine what it could look like. And of course, I had to pay homage to a minor celebrity from Liverpool. So don't get me wrong, this is not easy. I'm certainly not holding up as the gold standard that everybody should do co-production. I'm not saying that. There are many projects that I don't do co-production because it's not set up for it, we don't have the resources, etc. But it is emotionally taxing. It's tiring. And it's uncomfortable as an academic to be told, Brett, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Those people who are promoting the snackability and snacking, let's see their response. Will they be like, no, you're wrong, or will they be uncomfortable and then change? Let's see. Let's see on this, because that also affects our careers, and we're wrapped up into this. It's time-consuming, so in our world, we want quick and fast work. In organisations' world, you want quick and fast work. Things need to be done quickly. Co-production's not like that. It's time-consuming. And so we need to build in a different temporality to how we think about things. And it needs resourcing. It needs resourcing. I'm fully behind that. It costs money. It costs money. But our structures don't support it. Our university structures and policies don't support it. So anybody that's gone through finance at a university and you hand the finance sheet to somebody, getting into the UK is bad enough. Try and get £10 from a university. It'll take you years. That's not good co-production. Not good co-production. So we've been trying to challenge this in our university at Durham, and I have a meeting with our finance and senior people on the 5th of December to say, we need this changed. And it's not me being around the table, it's also disabled people themselves as part of the co-production group, so we can change our university structures and systems so that we could be more effective as a civic university, as a university that wants to work better with its community. But of course, all this is infused with power of politics and identity, because in me giving over different types of knowledge, I'm, of course, don't have the power as the so-called expert. I'm maybe here and having this privilege of being here today, but many other colleagues are doing keynotes as part of this and so on. But ultimately it's challenging, because as an organisation, for example, are you willing to say, actually, I don't have all the knowledge? Yeah, that's a challenge to an organisation's power. It's a challenge to our power as academics to say, we're not the arbiters and the sole human beings of knowledge. There are different types. It's a challenge to our identities as well. When we're invested in something, when we're invested in it and somebody says we're wrong, it's like, whoa, 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 it hurts. It hurts us as academics. But we've got to be better at being hurt and saying, actually, for our community and to make a difference, our identities can take a knock and we might need to shift them on this. So our identities are also wrapped up in this, and we have to be much more changeable in terms of how we deal with power, politics and identities. But of course this isn't something off a brochure that you can simply read A, B, C of doing co-production. It's not like that, and people fall into this trap continuously. And I've worked with some great scientists over the years, but one thing I have found is that certain scientists, those people particularly in labs, and there's nothing against lab folks, please don't get me wrong, I'm director of research, I support my labs, but labs folks, it's very difficult for them to get their heads around co-production of working with, of saying, you know, we're equal in this process, you're not white coat experts. It's a big challenge for these people, really big challenge. And so I've come to think of this co-production as a craft, a way of being, and a way of becoming. And it's challenging to us to let some of our identities, let some of our habits, habitus, dissolve in this. But I'm also saying this, it's not for everybody, and that's fine, and that is fine as well. But my worry is, because it's becoming such an important buzzword and it's such a lever for grants, everybody's jumping on it. And then it becomes tokenistic, and disabled people are the people that elevate our careers. We become simply just another cog in the wheel for impoverished research that inflates our grants and that improves our careers. It's not the way it be. So we've got to move away as well from this idea that we can simply do co-production because we've read a book. No. It takes a long time to learn this craft, just like it takes a long time to be a good butcher, to be a good architect, and so on. So, just to draw a few things to a close. Yep, co-production is very valuable, I believe. But don't get me wrong, I'm not holding it up there as the gold standard, and secondly, it's something that we all must strive to do. What I'm saying is that there are different types of co-production. Some are better for certain research projects, some may be better for different organisations. So as an organisation, are you talking about co-production? Is it going to be useful? If so, what type of co-production do you think is best? The integrated knowledge translation, where it's about the outcomes, where it's about different knowledge users, that disabled people don't necessarily need to be the heart of it, or do you want the more equitable, experientially informed co-production, where disabled people are at the heart of it, they prioritise the research, they prioritise the strategies, they work with, for example, academics along the way, doing the research itself if they wish. We work with them, we train them, we support them, they train us, and they help us disseminate the work, and they help us implement that work. But we shouldn't hold that as the only way of doing research. Okay? That's a very narrow, naive view. But at the same time, as an academic, and my co-production and our co-production group keep pressing me, well, where's the evidence of good co-production? How are we going to hold us accountable? So one thing I would ask the audience members is, if you're doing co-production, let's look at the evidence. How have you done it well? That's not to call for a recipe. It's not to call for a recipe. But what can we learn from your mistakes, your failures, your challenges? What can we learn from what you've done well? And to be honest about it, because we're not perfect. We do fail at times. There are challenges along the way. How could we evidence what might mean good impact? Not what I think is good impact, but what the disabled people themselves believe is a good outcome. Not what I think, because my funder tells me, or because X organisation tells me, but what's an important outcome for disabled people themselves. We certainly need more funding in this space. And we also need to challenge those individuals that are getting multi-millions of pounds to do work, who are sat in their offices, who believe that they know best for the population as a whole. No more of that. No more of that. We also need better training as well. And I don't mean training in a manual way, but I mean in terms of learning the craft on this. So one thing our co-production group has asked for us is not only for them to do different training, but how could they then train other people and work better, having done co-production, and some of them have done co-production for 15 years now. We've got a wealth of information. How could we learn from people, not just academics, but those people who've been on the other side? So, for me, when I was part of co-production groups, when I was in hospital, for example, what was it like for me? What did I learn from this? And rather than just all this academic language as well, and we put it in our publication, there it's highly dense, highly academic, the co-production group have challenged and everything else, but how might we translate this into more accessible work? So, for example, the co-production now are asking this question: how could we translate this academic work about what is co-production, and how could we do it better into practical examples so that other people could utilise it in appropriate ways if they see fit, of course, because it's certainly not the holy grail to change, it's certainly not the holy grail to transformation, but I do believe it plays a small but yet equally valuable role in not only research, but I would suggest in how different organisations might operate. I won't name a dominant organisation, but there are two key things I've learned. Some organisations might care about wanting to do co-production, but the second question is, are you willing to do good co-production? I find that often a no from certain organisations, some very dominant organisations, because I now then don't have the power as the chief executive, I don't have the power, it's going to knock our identity and so on. Okay. That's a different space for different examples. I'm clearly not going to speak about those organisations here because it would be unprofessional of me in this context. So I want to thank you for listening about some complexities around co-production. We've certainly argued that rather than talking about one co-production, we need to talk about multiple types. We need to be able to say what type we're using, be judged about that, and we need to work much better alongside the communities that we're trying to work with, support, so that we can make a better world, just however that world might look like. So thank you to my many colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Brett. I know I'm feeling inspired in relation to how I position myself as a researcher and the type of research that we do moving forward. And I hope, as a university, we can perhaps host one of these events or look to get involved in that particular methodology. I can see it serving different projects that we're engaged in. So we do have time for a couple of questions. With the tech issues at the start, we are going to run slightly over, and I believe Tabo is going to catch us up in the next session. Do we have any questions?
So, brilliant, by the way. Thank you. That was amazing. You're an incredible speaker. Just a question in reference to your statement about the Paralympic legacy from 2012.
Imagination.
You said we don't have good evidence for the lack of legacy. I'm just questioning, why is it always up to the marginalised people to show evidence of a failure rather than privileged people to show evidence of success? Because we had Tammy Gray Thompson here yesterday, and if anyone knows, she knows.
Yeah. No, I would fully agree with you, and I think it was remiss of me not also to say, whilst we don't have good evidence, we also need to question what do we mean by evidence.
Yeah.
Definitely, that was remiss of me, so I'm not as good a speaker as you suggested. I missed that important point, because that comes back down to what we mean by evidence, and of course we mean large sample sizes, we mean hardcore quantitative data, and so on. So when we're in, for example, in government, that's the type of data that they want to do. Use that.
Do you think we don't have it, or we haven't collected it?
If you want that data, I don't think it's been done that well.
Yeah.
In all honesty, it's not been done that well, and not least because the questions have not been co-produced with disabled people.
Yeah.
What's meaningful for you from a legacy? What's meaningful for you? I think those are the issues. We might see good outcomes, but the outcomes that X team wants to promote that makes them look good, are those the right outcomes? I don't know. So, yeah, to rebalance that, what I mean by evidence is multiple coming back down to experiential knowledge. That needs to be at the forefront more frequently when we put that. So, my sincere apologies for that misunderstanding.
Any other questions?
I'm trying to think of a way of actually to put this, but it's almost like how much more of kind of disabled communities requiring of co-production versus other marginalised communities.
Sorry, I can't.
We again, disabled people tend not to be involved in things for whatever reason. How much behind other marginalised communities are we?
How far?
Brett, can you just reflect that question and don't even over here?
Yeah. Sorry, my hearing's also not great. How far are disabled people behind in terms of co-production? The honest question is I don't know. Honest question is I don't know on that front. I don't know.
Just because it feels like disabled people are forever being told.
Yeah.
And so we're coming from quite a different direction to most of the groups.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I've written down was why are we looking for more women coaches? Well, we're not necessarily looking for more disabled coaches. We should be saying the same way around.
Yeah.
We were just saying it's this thing of attitude, and kind of disability unfortunately comes in a different league to many other communities.
And I think as well, you know, the co-production group and certainly the kids that I've been working with, they've identified in different ways. So there's a group that identifies disabled, lesbian on that as well. I think, you know, this needs to be included in that. I don't know the answer to the question, you know, I'm not going to lie, that I think I do on that front. But I am convinced that whichever group, in terms of intersectionality, however we might play this, needs to be more at the heart of it rather than being tokenistic and just being left behind on that front. I don't know whether, and this might sound a cop-out as a speaker, but it's not, because this is a co-production. I mean, what would be your response, or what would be the audience's response to that question?
I think it's the same, to be honest. I think other marginalized communities face the same issues as well of recognition. I was speaking to yourself yesterday, isn't it? And I was saying that how come, because we're approaching Disability History Month, how come we suddenly start talking about disabled people at this time? Why don't we talk about disabled people every single day of the year? Because I'm black every day of the year. Why do it have to be talked about only in October, Black History Month? So we were chatting about this with yourself yesterday, that I just feel so sad that it's only 1 day or 2 days in the whole year, especially nearer this time. That I'm Equality and Diversity Manager for Jamos, by the way. Maybe that's why I'm so passionate about this, but even if I don't wear the hat of equality, I'm still from a protected characteristics myself, and intersectionality is part of me as well. And we were talking about it yesterday, we were just really lamenting, both of us, that how come is this part of the year that we start remembering disabled people? Why can't the media remember us every single day of the year? Why don't they invite you to talk every single day of the year? Why does it have to be this particular time of the year? So yeah, for me, thank you for asking the audience. I think it's so spot on. It's the same problem that we have.
I think these types of responses, these types of discussions then need to be at the forefront. That's why I'm also highlighting the significance of co-production in this, because I might be up here, but I'm not an expert on all of this, and that's why we need people who are experts to challenge my assumptions, other people's assumptions, and bring better ideas to the table.
One of the issues is, have you ever talked about after like Paralympics or like a massive like disabled sport that's in society, like it's not just talked about this sport every year, but it's only talked about every 4 years.
Exactly.
That's an issue.
Yeah, we know that from media analysis and so on about when do disabled people pop up in the media, who pops up and how they are presented in the media, and what's presented in terms of the different impairment groups at the Paralympics. And wheelchair users, 60% were at the Paralympic Games was about that, and others were literally less than 2 minutes showcased at the Paralympics around that. And that to me also signals the importance of diversity of different people, and certainly the co-production process that we've gone through with the children is being multiple impairment groups across. Very challenging for me to be able to get it right and to be able to work with them and to be able to get some interesting and important messages, but nonetheless all these kids have offered incredibly important and useful voices that will challenge how what was Public Health England, and I always forget what they're called now, Office of Health and blah, and disparities. But they're challenging what they're saying. So I mean, it's Chief Medical Officers on 4th, so let's see how they view. But as well, I think as well, your voices need to be embedded in all of these. Yeah, I'm repeating what I'm repeating.
Okay, conscious of time, I'm sure Brett's hanging around all day staying overnight and all of us. I'm just extending your stay in the city.
I wanted a nice sleep, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to sort that out.